My name is Ellen Wold, and I'm the Acting Director of Communications at Argentum. Argentum is a specialized asset manager focusing on private equity. We invest on behalf of the Norwegian state and private investors, and have investments in more than 140 funds in the Northern Europe. I hope you have enjoyed the last couple of days. Now we have 1 hour left. It's nice to see that some of you are still hanging in. We will spend the next hour talking about the ocean. The ocean is on everyone's lips these days. Now, this week, it's 2 ocean conferences in Oslo. You had one in Bergen a couple of weeks ago, which was, by the way, very good. And in Argentum, we see that when we talk with the VC environment about how we can scale the Norwegian Innovation Hub, we see that more and more often highlight that we have to focus on the industries where we are traditionally strong, where we already have a competitive edge. So instead of comparing ourselves in industries which is traditionally strong, like life science and health tech, we should be more focused on industries like the ocean. And that is why we're putting the ocean on the agenda here today. And we have a really interesting panel of experts that will discuss this topic. But first, let's get some more input to take with us into the conversation. Anders Gjendemsjø is associate partner at McKinsey, and he's working with the ocean. He's supporting clients on how to strategically position for new opportunities. He was the former global head of ocean and fishing sector at Deloitte and has worked with several of the biggest ocean companies in Norway and internationally. Please welcome Anders Gjendemsjø.
Okay, thank you all for showing up and listening to us, both a few slides here and also for the discussion. So what I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction on is the need for venture capital in what we see at McKinsey as an ocean of opportunities. So that's the purpose here for a couple of minutes now. So what we see that is that we are sort of always trying to find new ways of exploring the ocean and finding new ways to harness the resources stored in the ocean. And the way I view this is that you have some traditional sort of ways of using the ocean with shipping and port activities. You have oil and gas, you have fisheries and aquaculture, and these are just examples. And these are today by far the largest areas where we explore the ocean. And we see in Norway that on the left-hand side there with these 3 activities, we are really strong and really on the forefront in the global sector. And that's how we see our companies from Norway succeed outside of Norway. And also if you do professional services or consulting like we do and like we did at Deloitte, you also see there's a huge interest in experts from Norway in this sector. And that's why it also makes so much sense to also, if you're going to do venture capital, to look for companies in Norway and also to look for expertise to sort of follow up and do these investments. If you look a little bit on what's emerging, you see that there in the seafood sector, you see there's now going to be a lot of offshore farming. The Havforskningsinstituttet, Institute of Marine Research now in Norway are exploring these, and we know there are a lot of companies positioning for that, both the supplier industry and also the farmers. We see there's a lot going on in offshore wind, and there are many other industries which I could have listed. And also we see that on the horizon there is a little bit of focus these days on tidal wave energy, deep sea minerals, whether it's mining or picking, or seaweed, seagrass, many of these things. Some of these things you might think are very small, but they will become, I think, really much larger in the years to come. And also supporting these industries, there are an extreme amount of supplier companies. Some are doing digital stuff and some are doing other stuff, but it's so interesting, this and all the opportunities we have here. And then if you look a little bit on the venture capital, I see that as a sort of a mean to transform some of these companies that have grown from the startup stage and before they become really big and interesting companies that can be bought by PE or listed or large industrial companies. And in preparing for this, I've done a lot of calls and research and trying to understand, is this middle part existing in Norway? And if I only had to give one answer with two letters, it would be no. So all the people I've talked to say that this is really, really a limiting factor. So this is the sort of on the supply side of things. And then if we look at the demand side of things, I think I've lost count of how many PE funds I have been talking to or looking to buy something in the ESG sector or ocean technology from Norway. And typically they all have the sort of the same challenge. It's not expensive enough. So if you run a fund and you can only buy into a certain amount of companies and you have this sort of sum under assets under management, it is clear that you need to sort of, there's a limit on that. So then what we see is that you have in Norway an enormous amount of great people with industry knowledge, many good startups. There's a missing bridge between that and sort of the demand side of this, and hopefully we can get to talk a little bit on that today. So I think this is a perfect starting point for why there is a need for this venture capital in this sector. And that holds for whether you do energy-related stuff, aquaculture, or whatever. It's the same in all these industries. So yeah, that was the last slide of the introduction.
Great, thank you, Anders. And just to add some facts about the ocean, in case you don't know, because Norway has always been an ocean nation, and for generations, fishing, sailing, oil and gas has been elements for our prosperity and growth, important elements. Our coastline is one of the longest in the world. We are the second largest exporter of fish and seafood. And 70% of Norway's export earnings comes from the ocean industries. And we're also one of the world's largest and most advanced shipping nations, and at the forefront of ocean research. And with that as a background, I will invite the rest of the panel up on stage. Anders, you can have a place in the sofa. And the next expert on stage is Ingrid Kylstad. Ingrid is the COO in Catapult Ocean, which is the new seed fund and accelerator working with startups developing sustainability-driven technology for the ocean industries. The next one is Lotte Skolem. She has worked 7 years with the PE companies in BCG, and she was appointed one of the Norway's most promising leader talents in 2017, and one of the top 50 Norwegian tech women this year. That's worth an applause. And last but not least, we have the host of today with us in the panel, Birgit Leodden. You know her a bit already, but she has been a change agent for next generation and sustainable leadership in the maritime industry for more than a decade. She is former director of Nord Shipping, founder of Young Ship International, and global project manager at Wilhelm Wilhelmsen. She holds several boards in ocean companies and has just started a new project, Tool, which we probably will hear more about. Give them all a warm round of applause. Okay. So first of all, I've just said something about your background, but please let's just spend 60 seconds, not 60 minutes, to talk about what you're doing right now and what you work with in your daily work. Ingrid, will you start?
So I work in Catapult Ocean. You briefly mentioned what we do. So we look for startups from all over the world that believe in developing technology that can solve sustainability challenges in the ocean industries, whether that's emissions for transport or making seafood traceable or find new ways to grow coral reef. So it's a really, we look for really diverse companies. We invest in them, as I mentioned, and take them to Norway for 3 months to help them really build a good business case. And our hope is that one day they will be one of those big, great companies that will have made the ocean industries even more sustainable.
Great. Lotte?
Yes, so I work in Aker Biomarine, and we are a biotechnology company that harvests krill in the Antarctic. And then we have the whole value chain, and we develop products for aquaculture, feed, and food for humans. And I work in the intersection between R&D and commercial, so I try to figure out what can we make, how does it work, can we sell it, how do we sell it. So new products and for new applications for now in biological systems, but we see also potential for other applications.
Great. And Birgit?
Yeah, so I'm founder of the Ocean Opportunity Lab, which is the world's first floating lab for entrepreneurs. And our mission is really to create a sea grassroots movement from bottom up for the next generation to become inspired and connected with our industries.
And Anders, you have already said some words about your work. Birgit, while Anders just gives us... do you have something to add?
Oh, not too much to add. So I support, over the last 10 years, I really worked a lot with the international industry in mainly the seafood sector, but now exploring also the ocean economy as a whole. Yeah.
I just think you have to turn on your microphone. Cause okay, while you do that, we can start off with the first question. And that goes out to you, Anders. Which areas within the ocean industry, as you see it right now, has the biggest potential?
Yeah, the biggest potential. So it's, I think in answering that, it's important to understand if we want to look at the biggest potential for growth or the biggest financial potential. Because the financial potential will obviously be definitely largest in one of the existing industries by just making that a little bit larger. But there's also a fantastic potential with some of these other industries that are really emerging. And if I would like to sort of say pick one industry that I think will have a tremendous growth going forward, I think it would be the sort of all of those I listed, but but I would pick the ocean farming, both in terms of the what actually company do with the farming, but also on the supplier industry to that, because that can become an enormous industry in Norway. And also, if you do ocean farming of various fish species, you can do it many parts of the world. So if we develop that industry, I think maybe the largest one will be the export of technology.
Okay.
Based on
do you agree on that, Birgit?
I agree. And just to add on supplying the fish farming industry, I would also say that I've been saying for years that I think that the future really of the Norwegian ocean industries is really to reapply everything we have learned and acquired from the offshore and oil industry, and now rethink completely new ways of how the ocean industries can bring value to the land-based society. So that we can reimagine all kind of floating infrastructure and resources for growing population in a much more urbanized society with needs that vary from season to season and from year to year.
And Ingrid, you work directly with the companies. Do you have some examples of some really exciting new innovations right now?
I mean, it's hard to pick one, right? But I think if we look at how we can benefit from the experience we have in oil and gas, I think it's very encouraging to see that of the Norwegian companies that we've invested in, 3 of 4 companies were started by people who were either subsea engineers or had worked in the oil and gas sector in other ways, and took that experience and that competence and reapplied it to other parts of the ocean industries. I would echo what you're saying, that ocean farming is really exciting. I mean, now we are looking at so many interesting algae projects and they want to, grow big farms and make big industries out of that. And I think that's a whole new way of looking at what we can harvest from the ocean. It's a lot more than just salmon, even though that's what we often associate with farming in Norway. So that's definitely an interesting sector.
But Anders, you mentioned that maybe the biggest challenge is the phase between the first idea and the scaling.
Yeah.
But what can be done to ensure that more of these companies actually get to the next phase?
Yeah, I think that it's twofold. One is, of course, it's always nice to point at somebody else than yourself. Everybody does that. But I think if you start with the companies, it's about sort of building a business plan that has the scalability that some of these VC funds are really looking for. And that means often sort of going outside of just Norway to tackle the sort of the global market. But at the same time being a bit realistic. You cannot tackle the global market with 3 people from Norway. So it's sort of balancing that. And it is also trying to challenge. It is not a lack of capital in Norway, but I think there is a lack of venture capital and competent people to sort of, for many of these companies, what they really need is competent capital. And sometimes, based on the feedback I get, it's slightly easier to get that internationally than in Norway. So it would be great to see more of these companies investing in Norway and also maybe establishing, because I think if you really want to do this great, you should set up an investment team here, and should be in Bergen, by the way. Let's say Norway.
Of course.
Yeah.
The two of you are nodding.
Yeah. I think, like you said, it's nice
To the
to
Bergen
point
part?
that. Well, that's that's good. No, I think, like you said, it's easy to point at someone else, but also representing the industry. I think that the industry can take an important role in this space, because it's not about. So if you go from the very small startup to the one that's big enough to get the capital that you were referring to in your starting talk, I think it's you don't have to necessarily stay there for so long. I mean, you want to get through that phase pretty quickly and not burn that much capital in there. You can get to the next one, and there I think that companies can contribute with opening up, taking in new concepts, being first customers, and also use their position to take this word out. So I think that's a role that established industry could take. That's not VC, but still important for that trajectory.
And I think that's something we can learn from the oil and gas and the shipping industry, because they've been quite conscious about building a supply industry in Norway and creating that cluster that we are so proud of today. And I think it's also important that all the fish farming companies also, as they mature now, understand that they have a huge role to play in fostering that cluster and that supply industry that eventually we can live off. But I think we shouldn't take this position for granted. It's a lot of interesting tech development happening in the rest of the world as well. So if we want to be big here, we have to really, be mindful of how we do that. I mean, we just a bit of promotion. We just mapped the global landscape of ocean tech startups, and 25% of the European startups, they are from Norway. But actually, it's not that many. If you consider that we are the ocean country in Norway, I would still say that's actually maybe alarmingly small.
Okay, so who are responsible for fast enough acceleration of this industry? Then you mentioned the industry.
Yeah, of course,
already established industry.
We've talked about this a bit before as well. I think it's everyone needs to play a part in this, and it's easy again to point to the regulators and say, okay, they need to take responsibility. And of course, from an industry point of view, to have predictability and everything is important. But I think also to be adapting quickly, because if we want to say expand into using new technology and using more of the ocean, which I believe is really important in order to be able to provide enough food for the whole world sustainably, we need to go lower in the trophic level, lower in the food chain. And that means new marine ingredients, for example, and we don't have regulations that are adapted to that. So that really slows down the pace of getting to the market. So, for example, we have been waiting for 6 years to get a fish or krill meal ingredients to the US just because the regulations are slow. And that, of course, that limits growth. So that's one thing, to at least not be someone who slows it down could be a good thing.
You have something to add, Anders?
No, I think that's good.
But you had a comparison with the other markets and regulations in other markets compared to Norway when we spoke earlier today.
Yeah, on the regulation. Yeah, I think what I see on the regulation, at some time you want it to be fast, but we have also seen regulations, in particular internationally, where they have been able to sort of ruin their own industry because of poor regulation. And I think it is this sort of like intersection between the authorities, the education, and the companies. And when all of those three work well together, and I would say that we do that in Norway quite well. So even though always we want our regulators to be a little bit more nice and a little bit quicker, I think we should use that as a sort of an asset that we have here in Norway. And also that some of these licenses that are now coming for, say, offshore wind, offshore farming, some of these, they are coming, and that will be huge enablers for us going forward.
If I can just add one thing, I think it's quite important that established industries, corporates, that they dare to be open about some of the challenges that they would like to solve, because there are unfortunately a lot of startups that have great ideas, but they don't have a customer, and they can't tell you which problem they're actually solving, or at least for whom they're solving that problem. So I feel that a bit more of a transparent, open dialogue about the innovation needs are important in order to stimulate all that talent that we have in the wider ocean industries to actually innovate, to solve that. So you have to know you have a market.
Yeah.
And I think another challenge and opportunity is that at most of the ocean industry companies in Norway, I mean, they have been entrepreneurial companies, but then they've grown so big so that they have become more administrative in the mindset. So for quite a long time, there has been very little focus on entrepreneurship in the ocean industries up until maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, which also means that the industries are not that mature in how to work with the startups and the entrepreneurs. And that's, I mean, for us, everybody, all of us in the industry, that's such a huge responsibility to bridge the kind of Davids and Goliaths in a good way, which is not always about the funding, but also about the customer journey. But it's also, I think, about breaking silos in new ways.
I think that's not only counting for the ocean industry. But when we get there, when this industry gets big, and it potentially can become huge, will the ocean stand it? Who is responsible for us not doing too much of a damage? Birgit?
I think what we need to do is we need to learn from what we've done on industrial farming on land. We can't do that in the ocean. We have to create businesses that are regenerative, that puts more resources and life into the ocean than what we take out, if we manage that. And I think Norway has really the best potential to do that. If we can do that, it's fine. Otherwise, we're kind of screwed.
Yeah. Would echo that. And I think one of the innovations that weren't mentioned that much earlier, but I think what's coming now, that we have the sensor technology and the ability to actually gather data, not just by researchers, but by individuals, by companies. So we start to understand more, and we still only understand this much, but we are able to gather data, and we have the technology development to put it together and create insight from that. I think that needs to be in place in order to be able to do this, because then the next step is to be able to harvest from all kind of layers instead of just eating the beef of the ocean that we have really been just taking out for so long, that we are able to do that in a balanced way. Of course, if you start to harvest all the algae and you think of a house of cards and you take the lowest level, everyone is of course worried about that. But if we do it in a balanced way, there's a lot of more biomass at the bottom that we can use and leverage in a sustainable way.
I think some of the solutions that some of the sectors that can become big, for example, alternative farming with algae, for example, that can actually be a CO2 sink. So some of these new industries can also help solve some of the challenges that we have, not only for the ocean but with climate change in general. Another massive challenge for ocean sustainability is illegal and unreported fishing. But if you find a way to solve that through the use of technology and better enforcement, you're actually, making it more sustainable to harvest. So I think it's possible to do this in a way that can be sustainable.
And when we talk about the sustainability, more than 200 people work in oil and gas in Norway, which is a huge part of the ocean industry. How can we ensure that employment in the ocean industry is still as high as it is now in the time in the future where oil and gas is probably phased out?
I think a very bad way that discussions are going these days is that you create a picture of an oil and gas industry that is just gone, and then that we have to reinvent something from the scratch, and we don't, because I think that just the strength and the size and the innovation capabilities in our existing industries are what can really give us the push ahead. But in order to do that, the existing oil and gas companies has to put enough R&D, enough resources into creating the future income while still living from the current. And I think that's where the financial sector and the government can really also play a big role in pushing that now before it is too late.
But are they on their way to do it, or
too slow?
Yeah, you can always argue about the pace of this, but I would say that when the oil price previously, it was like $110 flat for a couple of years. At that time I was an equity analyst, and it was very easy in the spreadsheets, so you just assumed that the oil price next year was the same as the last year, and you were like a star because you always hit. And then all of a sudden it crashed, it went down to $20 something. And at that time, it happened a lot of interesting things. You of course, unfortunately for those in that industry, some of them lost their jobs. Hopefully they have gotten new ones now. But that industry had to sort of innovate. And also many of the investors and the companies saw that this being only one industry is a little bit limiting, and also no diversity in terms of your revenues. So what we have seen over the last few years is that very many of these extremely interesting companies with super high competent people, they are also now exploring other industries. And together with some people in this audience, I previously led this, there was a project funded by the Norwegian government from oil and gas to the aquaculture. And we led many of these companies over into very exciting opportunities in the aquaculture sector, and know that the oil price is a little bit back, maybe 60, 70 instead of 20, not 110. They're still using both of that, and that creates new jobs. And also it is a little bit interesting to also, we're not touched upon that yet, but the competence part of this. Because when the oil price was very high, all the talent in Norway wanted to work for the oil companies, and they had all the money in the world to invest and innovate. And so we're just trying to shift that a little bit and spread that pool over more of the ocean industries. And I think going forward, I think there's a huge reason to believe that the ocean industry will be larger, not smaller. But maybe it will be sort of distributed a little bit more evenly, and that could also be very well for Norway in terms of.
I would also say that in many ways we can look at the oil and gas industry as the tobacco industry. But one huge opportunity is that you don't just waste the competence because you have something else to build on. But I think that we can't really take for granted that we will be first, because we're also quite lazy. We are kind of oil fat still. And it's so important that we actually don't lean back in that fat, but that we actually jump out of it and look at all the ocean energy opportunities and new industries beyond what we already are familiar with. And I think that the young generation also have a huge role also to push that, to push the seniors.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can just add, I think also a lot of the jobs and a lot of the value creation from oil and gas is also in the supply industry, and then it comes back to the point that if we can build also an interesting supply and service sector for other offshore ventures, whether that's in farming or energy, you can still, have a lot of technology-intensive jobs on land that supports the ocean industries, and also think. Even if oil and gas were to continue forever, you would still be looking at very different types of competencies with the people who are working there, because now you need to know more about IT, software, programming, in order to even get a job in shipping. I mean, you have to, you have to really know how to run things digitally. So I think, there's anyway happening a certain transition of talent and competence.
But Lotte, you work with this probably in your role. With using the competence in a traditionally a company with traditionally strong
yes, in the Aker overall umbrella. Well, yeah, we definitely see. I think there comes also this push from the new employees in itself, that actually they expect that the company does something more dramatically. I think the kicks comes almost from inside, rather than having someone enforcing it outside. Because if you're going to get the best people, you need to do something tangible, not just some marketing stunt because people see through that when they come inside. So we see really that is pushing also the traditional companies to thinking more, and also daring maybe to make some bets on something that you can't really calculate home at this point in time. Because if you're trying to calculate the normal business case, you're using yesterday's numbers, and no one really understands. It can put the real value on the green kind of value add in the future.
But I also want to add that I think if we want to win the race for being leaders in ocean technology, we have to open up more than in terms of our own market. We are really good at attracting great academics to Norway. Lots of foreigners doing PhDs in Norway, but they don't start their business here. And if you are a Norwegian startup and you want to really grow fast, you sometimes relocate. Well, not sometimes, quite often relocate outside of Norway.
But
so
why?
It's for capital structures, it's for market access. So we have to become a little bit more commercial, perhaps, in how we are to, not just make sure that we transition existing jobs and talent into new industries, but that we also manage to become the place you want to be if you want to grow an ocean business. And I think we still have a bit of a way to go there. I mean, for example, our accelerator program is a banal example, but it runs for 90 days, because that's how long you can stay in Norway. That's 90 days. That's the visa requirement. It's easier to get a football player a longer an extension than to get a founder, a tech enthusiast, an extension. And that's just sad. So no offense to football, but
But is the problem of the acceleration, is it the speed? Is it, how can this be done, or how can we achieve a faster acceleration of the innovation?
Well, I think it comes back to solving real problems, and that established industry is willing to be the first pilot customer and give honest feedback. I think that's also something, you have to create a good understanding within established industry, that if a startup approaches you, do not expect a perfect product, but expect to be a partner on the R&D development and give honest feedback, and don't just be polite, because nothing grows out of politeness. You just keep on doing the same thing. You have to be honest and tell them, you're solving this, that's great, we have to work on that to become better. So I would, encourage that pilot customers are really good pilot customers, and see that they have a role to play in accelerating that growth.
But are we good enough at on collaboration? Birgit, you
quite, but more in the established part of the industry. I would say that the cluster at Sunnmøre is really the cluster that is paving the way on that, whereas in in Bergen and the other clusters, we don't have the exact same mentality, and that slows down the speed and the opportunities. So I would say that more companies and more clusters across the ocean industries, they need to look to what they're doing at Sunnmøre. And we also need to tear down the walls between the ocean industries and land-based industries, because a lot of the new solutions that we will be bringing into the ocean space is already, tested and developed for other industries, so that we will get faster into the ocean with new solutions when we learn to collaborate more. And I think that you had a really good point, Ingrid, because one thing is that our own startups move out. The other big problem is that we really lack cultural diversity in the Norwegian business society from top level down. So we lose a lot of available and really great talents from around the world, whether to recruit them from the outside or actually utilizing them when they're in our society. So that's perhaps a different perspective on collaboration, but it's still, we need to really utilize all resources in a good way and get the smartest heads in here, and then we need to collaborate maybe also in ways we don't normally traditionally think of as collaboration within ocean industries.
Do you agree, Lotte?
I completely agree to that, and I also think that sometimes we tend to see Norway as like, that's the world, which
like
means
a
that's
bubble.
yes. So my neighbor, like 2 kilometers from me, is like my arch enemy, and I will, instead of saying, okay, we're a tiny corner of the world, let's work together, and really, we could achieve much greater things if we manage to do that. But we're actually suffering from this like small city kind of neighborhood, small battles instead of helping each other. I think there's potential there. If we manage to come over that.
I would say on that note, I would say that challenge a little bit Birgit on that. I've been working with the clusters here in Bergen, both the seafood and the ocean technology clusters, and I see a lot of very good collaboration there. So we challenge that a little bit. But I would also say that it varies a lot, not necessarily by the cluster itself, but by the company. And I've been really inspired, for example, one thing that Aker BP has done with this Cognite and this data revolution. Yes, it's a little bit of marketing, but it also has a lot of content and opening up the data and collaborating and inviting other operators to come and look at this is how we do the digital. It would be great if you guys also do the same and we can learn from you. And I think that is a very mature thing that we do not see in all of the other industries. And a little bit of this is also on these new technologies like analytics and machine learning, and that is fueled by the amount of data you have. And now in many of these industries, we see that the people have read on the internet that data is the new oil, so they think we need to keep it. But it's also something that if you keep it for too long, it has zero value. So it's also about doing this collaboration, and for many of these industries, if you really collaborate. So I think it's also redefining a little bit of the notion of who is your competitor and who are you collaborating with to open up this, and also to open up for some of the startups getting these data. There we see that there is progress, but there is also at some of the sort of C-suite level, it's also a bit of reluctance because all of this digital stuff is new and we don't want to make any mistakes, etc. So better not to do anything. But of course they're doing a lot, but still, once that trust is established, we can do a lot more. And one of the really good things we have in Norway is the trust. So we just need to apply that also to the digital sector about sharing those data. So yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely second that, and we see that one of the reasons why many startups want to come to Norway is because we have flat hierarchy. It's quite easy to access people, whether that's industry leaders or politicians. I think we actually share quite easily. That's at least been my impression as well, and I think it is to our benefit, I think, when you're transforming an industry or moving into the low-carbon society, that we are small, because it's easier to get people on board and pull in the same direction. So I think there are definitely some strengths there that we can play up.
Yeah, you briefly touched upon that, but I think on our strengths, the trust, but one thing that's I think crucial when you work on asset intensive, when you or capital intensive industries, and you really need things to work, and it's very very expensive or dangerous if it fails. Like typically you do stuff out in the ocean. That's the case. You really benefit from a good safety and culture. And culture is also like a fluffy word, but a mindset that's with a flat hierarchy, and with instead of having one person at the top thinking, like you see quite often. If you have in Norway, I think we have a good culture of everyone expecting to think and provide feedback and criticize or comment, and then you will also avoid these big like catastrophes or things that go really wrong. So I think that's a strength that we have in Norway that we can use in particularly this space.
And then further on collaboration, an area that should be very easy to do something with is also the cross collaboration between the various ocean clusters of Norway. There's such a huge untapped opportunity there, because we tend to have this small town mindset that all the different cities and regions are competing against each other, instead of realizing that we can create, as Silja has said earlier during this conference as well, we can create such a much bigger cake and each have our pieces if we strengthen the national collaboration. That should be an easy thing to do.
Okay, we're soon running out of time. One final question, and you all get the chance to answer it. According to OECD estimates, ocean-based industries could double the contribution to the global economy by 2030. So how can we reach that goal in Norway? And how can venture capital contribute to us reaching this goal? Is it realistic?
Yeah, there are many ways of reaching that goal. So if you want to double your revenues, you could either sort of really grow, or you can do as like the Norwegian government has done for some time, sort of stop all growth in some of these sectors and the prices double. And then you also have double the revenues in a quite easy way. The other way, of course, is to much more fun and to grow through actually increased volumes and these things. And I think for that, I think we need the whole ecosystem to grow. And yes, it will be possible, and it will be we don't know yet of the chart I showed which of these that will sort of really grow fast. And it's also, if you want to double by 2030, that's 11 years ahead. So that means that we have to, in a couple of years, see some real actions. And it's a big question on which of these industries that will actually have that potential. And I think some of these in the emerging industries can do that. So yeah, I believe it's possible.
Great, Ingrid.
I hope it's possible, and I also hope it happens in a manner that's sustainable, and that it doesn't, all of it doesn't have to come from, say, for example, deep sea mining that we haven't regulated well enough yet. So I really hope we can do it in a way that also respects the boundaries of the ocean. And I think we can also challenge ourselves to look at new things to do in the ocean industries. It doesn't have to be only salmon, but that we should look at other ways of doing ocean farming and take some inspiration from what's happening in academia and in research at the moment within those areas. And I think we can benefit a lot.
Yeah, I really think there's potential lower down in the food chain. I think we need to go there. I think we are starting to get the technology to do it, and in a sustainable way. And I think that's an area where we really need scale in order to be able to be profitable, and that's why we also need venture capital to get there, because if you're two people starting up, you're never going to get there without some serious muscles. So I think that would be crucial to succeed with that.
I think we have some huge opportunities if our government sticks to the fact that they've said that we're cutting our maritime emissions by 50% by 2030. That will impact a lot. I think we have huge opportunities to combine production of offshore renewable energy in various forms with regenerative production facilities for various type of life from and plants from the ocean.
Okay, great. So we managed to end this on a positive note. That was the last question for today. Our time is up, so I just want to say thank you. And thank you all for listening.